Peace and blessings, family. This is your brother, asarimhotep, with the Martin Delaney Center for Egyptology. And this is another episode on how to critique the critique. And we are again reviewing a particular critique from the linguist, Dr. Capo-Chichi, in regards to Jean-Claude Mboli's 2010 work titled The Origin of African Languages. So this is part 2 of our ongoing series. So all that and more when we return in just a moment. And we are back. Again, this is How to Critique the Critique. Capo-Chichi regarding Mboli, part 2. Now we're going to be dealing with a particular critique regarding the human body. And we do this series titled How to Critique the Critique so that, you as a budding researcher will know what it means to simply not go with a particular expert's critique just because they made one. So the critique that a scholar makes of another scholar's work, that must be held to the same standard that you have for the first scholar. So critiques themselves can be critiqued. And so we are doing that today. So our example is coming from Dr. Capo-Chichi. And if you remember from the first video, he is a linguist, I think originally out of Benin, and he did his PhD in linguistics in Paris. And I'm not sure if he received just yet, but according to the Harvard website, he is currently studying art history, getting a second PhD. And so he is one who is should be familiar, of course, with language and linguistics and all that it entails. But to the lay person, when they hear linguistics, that somebody studies linguistics or got a degree in linguistics, they automatically assume that it's simply just kind of one big, broad field that, a linguist who makes a critique to another linguist, they may not be from the same area of specialization. And so this is what we have here. So Jean-Claude Mboli by trade is an electrical engineer on the master's level. And again, Capo-Chichi is an art historian and a linguist, but his field of linguistics is kind of general linguistics, and he does more so synchronic. At least what has been published of his work has been very synchronic focus, whereas Jean-Claude Mboli, his specialty is in diachronic linguistics, historical comparative linguistics, and the reconstruction process. So these are actually totally different fields of linguistics. And there is, however, how should I say, in order to do the work that Mboli does, he has to be familiar with the scope and field of analysis that Capo-Chichi is an expert in. But Capo-Chichi does not have to be an expert and do what Jean-Claude Mboli does, because again, it's a totally separate field. So Capo-Chichi is not concerned with the confirming and building of language families, uh, dialectology, things like that, reconstruction. And so there's just certain things that he would not necessarily be uh, privy to, via practice, that in a way that Jean-Claude Mboli would. But that does not mean that his critiques of Mboli are invalid by any means. And so, as we saw in the first video, he has some very valid critiques regarding Jean-Claude Mboli. So, when you are, of course, a researcher, you have to be able to, set your feelings aside or personal relationships and be able to acknowledge when an argument is in fact solid. And so this is why we do what we do, so that we can have a more well-balanced and a more well-balanced perspective, on the issues at hand. So as I mentioned in the first video, that, our good brother Smash Rockwell, aka Jonathan Owens, that he and I and a group of others have been going back and forth for a number of years regarding this subject of the etymology of the place name Kemet. And of course, Jonathan Owens, although he's, you know, uh, he can to some extent read the Meta Neter hieroglyphic script of the ancient Egyptians. He's not at all familiar with linguistics and what it entails. So when we bring these kind of linguistic arguments, he's at a disadvantage. And so of course, one of the strategies that Jonathan Owens and people of the kind of same milieu, so to speak, what they do is they try to look for people who uh, have degrees in certain areas, and they look for them to have a critique against our arguments and try to use them and weaponize them against us. And the problem with that strategy is that you have to be familiar with the subject and the field and the nuances and the history of that field in order to be able to evaluate and know what the central arguments are and how to solve any problems or conundrums. And so, I think he reached out to Capo-Chichi, and Capo-Chichi responded to him with a 19-page document, critiquing, having some major issues with Jean-Claude Mboli's 2010 work. And so he has not released that document publicly. However, Jonathan, in many of his particular shows, what he'll do is he'll showcase some of the information or some of the critiques that Capo-Chichi has made in the document he'll share his screen and show the PDF. And so So as of at least to my knowledge, the full 19-page critique has not been released. So I have to go to the extent of taking screenshots of the segments of the critique of the particular critique. So that's what I'm doing. So I'm taking screenshots of certain of his arguments and making a response video. So this is part two, and this is a a second critique. So each critique is going to have its own video. So uh, I had to take two screenshots because there's a little bit of text that you see here in the blue that that would not fit on the first screenshot. So you can see this is the screenshot. This is our good brother Jonathan at the top left, right? So put it, I did two screenshots and cut it. And so now it looks like one particular continuous, segment. So we're going to read what Capo-Chichi said, and then we're going to respond to the critique. So here we go. So Capo-Chichi says, Mboli arbitrarily adds an R in Middle Egyptian jet, meaning human body. So we'll stop there. So there in the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic script, there is a word that we transcribe with a D with an underline for the apparently the J sound, and which is suffixed by the T that you see here. So we just say jet, so human body. So Mboli transcribes it as j, and then he puts in parentheses an R sound dot T. So something like jeret, body of a person. And Capo-Chichi continues and says, in comparing it with Coptic jer, border, Shango, tere, body, side, border, Zande and Sango is an African language, Zande is an African language. Tise, body, and Hausa, Jiki, body, and Somali, Jir, body, right? So we can see that at least in pronunciation, the Coptic and Somali seem to favor more. And note that this in a Zande language, this se is a suffix meaning body. So this is actually cognate with the T suffix that you see right here, because there's a T in ancient Egyptian for body parts, a suffix T for body parts. So now he continues. He explains this addition of R by the existence of another or other words beginning with jir and relating to the body. For example, jiru, actually jiruru, side of the human body, which are written with the determinative F51 of the soft parts of the body. The problem with this hypothesis is that jet, body of a person, is never written with an R in the Egyptian text. There are, however, other words beginning with jiru relating to the side, but not to the body. Jittery, side walls of a vehicle, jitteru, sideboards of a coffin. This is thus more likely that the words beginning with jiru were primarily relating to the side, not to the body. Jiru simply means side. The reference to the body being here implied, while in other contexts, references to vehicles or coffins can be implied. A similar situation can be found in English if I would be written SD in hieroglyphs, and C, which would be written S in hieroglyphs, are the same word, in that a D must be added to C, since I can also use side to mean the side of the room, side of the body, etc. So that is his particular critique, and this is what we will be discussing today. And so, my first critique, again, you have to know the background of the critiquer. And because Capo-Chichi does not deal with diachronic linguistics, historical comparative linguistics, he is unfamiliar with the concept of derivation and semantic chains or semantic fields. And so when Mboli is speaking in the text, he's always speaking for the most part when he's doing these analysis diachronically. Diachronically meaning over time, dealing with change over a long period of time, versus synchronic. Synchronic analysis is only dealing with a particular form at one particular time in history, right? So if I'm talking about English in the 1970s, that is a synchronic analysis of the English language. But if I'm talking about, you know, English as a development from Proto Indo European to Proto Germanic to Old English to modern English, that analysis is diachronic. I'm doing a full diachronic analysis. And so, if I'm speaking within that context, more than likely I'm speaking of change over time in the language, and how the evolution of the semantine, the semantics of words and their applications happen over time. And so, in this particular case, what we're going to find out is that from this root, this historical root meaning body, that many different words derive from that root, including side. And then from there, the concept of the side of the body comes these other derivations. So you have to understand it in its diachronic analysis and how these words enter into the lexicon over time. So that's what we're dealing with here. So of course, this is our good brother Jean-Claude Mboli in the text that is being critiqued by Dr. Capo-Chichi is called "The Origin of African Languages," written in French, and it was published in 2010. And as I stated in the first video, as you can see, let's go back. As you can see in his analysis here, he's not citing Mboli directly. What he does is he attempts to summarize Mboli's arguments, and then Jonathan simply believes the summary of Capo-Chichi. And this is always wrong, wrong, wrong. When you're critiquing the critique, or when you're critiquing anybody, you always cite them directly. You write it exactly as how they wrote it, right? And so that's exactly what we're going to do. So this is a scan of the text. And so we can see at the top, so it's correspondence number 21 that we're talking about. And the analysis is on pages 148 and 149. So as you can see, just like what Capo-Chichi said, the word jet, body, this word corpse, this is of a person, right? Body of a person. He puts this in parentheses and R. Now, what we're going to be arguing here is that this R is not arbitrary, as Capo-Chichi tried to claim. So what he's trying to make it seem as if Mboli just randomly put this there. Like there's no logical and historical presence for that R, right? So here in the Coptic language, we have Jer, meaning border, And then we have in the Sango language, tere, meaning body, edge or coast, border. In the Zande language, we saw tise, body, Hausa, jiki, body, Somali, jir, body. So this is from the actual book, and this is the initial correspondence set. So he makes a commentary right under that. And so the original is what you see right there in the top, and then in the gray box is my rough translation. So he says the segment R that we introduced in the Middle Egyptian term is fully justified by other terms of the same language. So he's telling you here that this R is not a part of the root as we see in the dictionaries and in the text. However, there should be an R there, and I justify this based upon other terms in the same language, in particularly, for example, jiru, side of the human body. The determinative F51 of the soft parts of the body removes any doubt as to the meaning of this term. Moreover, the Shango term is also used in this sense. So this is the part why this is why you have to cite the person directly, because this is a an important part of this analysis. So he's saying here that we have in ancient Egyptian this one term, jet, meaning body of the person. But we also have this other form, jeru, or jer jerewu or jerewa, however you want to pronounce it, meaning side of the body. And so when he says here in this last line, moreover, the Shango term is equally or also used or employed, is what they say in French, in the same sense, right? So when you go back, you see those same words. Shango uses the word tere, meaning both body and border. So when you're doing historical comparative linguistics, sometimes when the related languages has a cognate for a particular term that you're analyzing, in language A, for example, in ancient Egyptian, the uh, the historical form may have went through a change and become two words or doublets in the language. So you have one, because a morpheme was lost, meaning, body of a person. But then you have the other form, deru, meaning border. So we think that there are really two words, but the same cognate in Sango language B has the same word, but it means both body and side, edge, and border. So this lets us know that Sango is more than likely closer to the original form of the word than the other languages, right? For example, Hausa and Somali, because they only kept the body semantine, but Sango kept the full semantic field, body, edge, because as we'll find out, it really means body and then arm and then side. And then from the concept of side or from arm comes the concept of side and the border and the edge, right? So if you don't include that in the analysis, it won't make sense, because it doesn't make sense to Capo-Chichi, because again, he doesn't do diachronic studies. And so, I deal with a similar situation in my upcoming book, Race and Identity in Ancient Egypt, Volume 1, Towards a Meaning of the Place Name Kemet. Of course, right now it's on pre-sale, which you can go to asarimhotep.com and pre-sale, order your pre-sale copy, and you will get a sample chapter when you order, right? So we're going to do an analysis here, and some of you may have seen this before, but we're going to tackle a particular issue. So this is an analysis that I do between the Proto-Bantu reconstructions, the Sumerian language, and the ancient Egyptian language, primarily Middle Egyptian. So on the Proto-Bantu, in the Proto-Bantu column, you can see a series of words that I have highlighted in terms of the consonants and bolded in red. The sequence, the consonant sequence, M as in Mary and N as in Nancy, right? So we can look at the first row and we see the reconstruction in Proto-Bantu Manya, and which is a variant, has also been reconstructed Mani, meaning stone. And if you don't know, actually, this is the root of the word Amen in Imani, right? That's another conversation for a different day. And then we have Sumerian Bal, meaning type of stone. And then in Chikam or Egyptian, we have Benwit, hard stone, Kurin, right? And so notice that in the M in the first consonant position corresponds to B in both the Sumerian and the ancient Egyptian first consonant position. And so the N corresponds in the second consonant position corresponds to L in Sumerian in the second consonant position, and N is in Nancy in the second consonant position in Egyptian. So now let's look at the second word, shine, splendor, right? It doesn't have a second consonant. So we have M, U, E, both low tone on the vowels, right? But when we look at Sumerian, we have B, R, shine, glow. And in Egyptian, B, N, to shine, right? And it has the verbal prefix W in front of ben, meaning to shine. So although Proto-Bantu, the reconstruction, is missing the second consonant, we still consider this cognate with the others, with the Sumerian and the Egyptian forms, because of the series. That's why we have to do an entire series of correspondences. So we see that men press squeeze, especially the nose in Proto-Bantu, becomes bara to mix, barag, which is G is the ongoing action suffix, meaning to press. And then in Egyptian, instead of B this time, is P, knead bread, squeeze, crush during brewing, right? So we have a verbal T suffix in this case, right? And in the next line, we have Moni, pull out, come out. Bala, draw water to pour out. Penes, pull out hair, cut off a joint. So this S is actually a suffix. And we see that in the next entry, men meaning to bend, which in the same semantic field means to turn. So it's bala, to turn, to rotate, turn over, cross. And then in Egyptian is partially reduplicated, penin, meaning to twist. But we have this other one here with this verbal S suffix, pin, meaning twist. So that's how we know, we have further confirmation that the S is a suffix here. It's a verbal suffix. And then we have in this next line, mamin, which is a partial reduplication. So you see how in this example, the M is repeated for the first consonant position, and the N is in the singular. But when we look at this form, the penin in the word for twist, the first consonant is only present once, but the second consonant is repeated twice. So this, what you see here in penin twist, the is happening in this reconstruction here, except this time the first consonant is repeated twice, and the second consonant is only repeated once, right? And so we know that, this is a good reconstruction here, because in Egyptian, we have better to distribute, to pour out. It too is reduplicated. And so this second consonant is the nasalized uvular trill. And this interchanges with N all the time, N and R in Egyptian. So this is sound. And so we see in this last one here, we have meh, meaning dew, like the dew that is on the ground in the morning. And then we have bera, moisture, perspiration, bari, moist, damp, right? So in both of these examples where there is only one consonant in the Proto-Bantu, in Sumerian and Egyptian, there is two consonants in sequence, right? So without going through all of the examples that I did in the book, because I had a whole series of tables and correspondences that prove that these forms that you see in the Proto-Bantu correspond to these forms that you see in the Sumerian and Egyptian. And so what I did is I put all of the words that were missing the second consonant in sequence in Proto-Bantu, and then lined them up with words, their correspondences in both the Sumerian language and the Egyptian, to show a pattern here, right? So that these second consonants are missing. So if I was to reconstruct and look at these words here, all right, even though this one here isn't necessarily missing a second consonant, it is missing the second consonant in the first part of the reduplication. So this is why this is here. But showing that it's missing the second consonant, because just like what you see here in Egyptian in the word for to pour out, it is reduplicated here. And this one's only partially reduplicated. So as you can words that have the same issue here, that when you only see the first consonant in Proto-Bantu, you see a second consonant in the Sumerian and in the ancient Egyptian language. So if I was to put, and I talked about Tui, for example, let's say Tui head, and I put for example, an L or an R in here. It's not to say that, that this was necessary, that you should write it there, but we're telling you that there is a consonant missing, and more than likely this is the consonant. Because when we compare and look at the other data, it was there. And so in most of these these comparisons here, you notice that the second consonant is what we would call kind of a lateral or rotaric, consonant, an R or an L sound, right? And then of course they interchange this nasalized into N, and D in, when you go d d d d, if you go la 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 la, if you go ra 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 ra, you put your tongue in the same area to make the sound. So how you uh, exhale the breath, and the way that your tongue curls or not determines, the particular sound that is going to be produced. But in linguistics, we call these hormorganic sounds, because you make all of these particular sounds using the same place of articulation, right? So whether it's D, whether it's R, whether it's L, whether it's N, they're all in the same place, right? And so that is very important, because this is a very important text to get if you're studying historical comparative linguistics. This doesn't teach you how to do historical comparative linguistics. It does, however, give you some fundamental principles that are important in terms of understanding what you're doing, and why certain conventions have stayed over time within the field of historical comparative linguistics. And so on page 129, he notes that both the uvular and dental are, whatever their exact realizations. Remember that this this sign here that you see, for example, in the third column, where it has B in this particular sign here, this is what we would call the um, the nasalized uvular trill. So it's a type of nasalized R sound. So that's when he's talking about this, both the uvular and the dental, that is the ra, 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 you know, um, it can be just ra, or it can be like a trill, like ra, it's a rapid R sound. But regardless, your tongue, the tip of your tongue, and those type of sounds we call an apical sound, has to touch the top, on the back ridge of your mouth, behind the teeth, behind the dental, the ra, right? Whatever their exact realizations, have a strong tendency to be lost in the coda of syllables. Frequently, that loss proceeds through an intermediate centering glide, which can be transcribed as this kind of schwa symbol here, right? And so if you don't know what the coda is, I put the definition right here at the bottom from Wiki. A coda is made up of the consonants at the end of a syllable. So when it says, both uvular and dental R, whatever their exact realization, have a strong tendency to be lost in the coda of syllables. That means at the end of syllables. So when you see these forms here, and they correspond to an uvular or a dental sound, a liquid is what we would say sometimes, you know what is going on. So these are some certain principles. That's the name of the book, Principles of Historical Linguistics. You got to kind of always keep this in the back of your mind when you're seeing that pattern, right? And so they give an example, like if you was to say the word stands, the consonants NDZ, ins, is the coda of the word stands, right? It says many languages such as Swahili do not allow codas. A syllable without a coda is an open syllable, and one with a coda is a closed syllable, right? Because most Bantu languages have to end in a vowel, but in some places that is changing, right? So uh, going back to the text, how I deal with this phenomenon, I give the example that I just did, and we're gonna deal with the first entry here, buoy, stone, right? So you see buoy or bue, stone, corresponds to Sumerian abale, a type of stone, and chikam, benwit, hard stone, cairn, or you could say ben stone, right? So we can see that there's a liquid in the nasal in the second consonant position, but it is dropped in the coda position, the consonants, right? So I state in the text, by comparing Chibantu and Chicam, ancient Egyptian, and Sumerian, we can better explain certain conundrums in the data. For example, Stewart 2002 states that the following concerning certain consonant vowel reconstructed forms in Chibantu. So Stewart states, where a common Bantu noun stem is segmentally consonant vowel, I treat the second vowel as a suffix, even where I have no other evidence, synchronic or diachronic. Those are those particular terms that we mentioned before, of its status as a suffix, and insert a hyphen enclosed by square brackets before it. For example, comparative pair 63, buoy, stone, right? So you can see that he's saying that. So what he's saying is here that when he reconstructed this word, the because I should say that Bantu is not known for having diphthongs. These are vowels that are two vowels pronounced together at the same time. And so it doesn't have that structure. So when you see a word like this, we know that it is off because it doesn't fit the normal structure of Bantu words. So by his logic, the e that we see at the end of the word here has to be a suffix that we reconstruct into the proto language, right? And so I continue the conversation and I say, here we see why the inclusion of Sumerian and Chicam, Egyptian, are indispensable when discussing Chibantu. Without our establishing regular sound meaning correspondences between the three languages, we would not know that the reconstructed form bui, or bue, or bue, is missing a consonant, as evidenced by Sumerian abale, a type of stone, and Chikam, benwit, hard stone, kern, ben, sacred stone. Now, the final vowel could be a suffix or could be what's left from a consonant vowel root. It is more than likely the former, given the same final vowel E in Sumerian. So you can see that the reconstructed form in Bantu as well as the Sumerian form both end in E. However, the first vowel in Sumerian is Ah, while the first vowel in the reconstruction of Proto-Bantu is U. But this isn't a problem at all because one, they're both back vowels, and other correspondences show that same uh, pattern between the two languages, right? So we continue. Now the final vowel. Oh, I said that already. So given Hawk's argument, that's who we read earlier in the principles of historical linguistics. Given Hawk's argument that the loss of R frequently goes through an intermediate centering, glide, we note in Chicam BB. So this is what a glide, this is how we reconstruct the glide in, or how we represent the glide in the ancient Egyptian. So we can see here that in the first consonant position, the R or whatnot, the liquid has been dropped, but it's still present in the second word. I mean, the second syllable in the reduplication of the word here, just like ben, sacred stone. And so we see, the B, a semi-precious stone. So this R becomes this semi-glide that we see here, right? So I note, however, that the R is maintained when followed by a voiceless stop. For example, beret, a semi-precious stone, right? So it's these little details that you have to have to know when you're making these analysis and evaluating other people's critique, because they may not be familiar with this information. So if I was to put in parentheses here, for example, Boudet, right? Because usually the L sound, what becomes L in Bantu derived from a D. So if I put a in parentheses and said Boudet, it's not arbitrary as Capo-Chichi tried to argue. It wasn't randomly placed there. It's based on a historical precedence from a full analysis of all the data, right? And so there's a secondary proof that Mboli puts into the text, which, Capo-Chichi doesn't even discuss at all, because I'm not sure when he read that critique if he actually read the entire book. But, the so-called feminine T suffix betrays the analysis of Capo-Chichi, and we'll see how. So in the first video, we did a similar analysis with the Zande language. So Zande was very important in our analysis in the first video. In this video, we're going to be dealing with the Sango language, which is in the Central Republic of Congo, in Central Africa. And this is, I believe, Mboli's native language. So either his mother or father is of direct Sango heritage, and then either the mother or the father is of Zande heritage as well. So on pages 294 and 295 of Mboli's work, and of course I translated here in English for you all, he gives a grammatical analysis and proof showing that what we're calling the feminine T in ancient Egyptian is alive and well in the Sango language. And the evidence of it is in the high tone of the final vowel. So the T disappeared, and because of the loss of this grammatical morpheme, it transformed into the high tone on the final vowel. So it's just like in physics, when when we make the statement that energy cannot be created nor destroyed, it can only change form. And to a limited extent, that is true even in linguistics. And so the physical form of the ancient Egyptian, or what was which survived in ancient Egypt as the feminine T suffix, transformed into the high tone in pitch in the final vowel in the Sango language. So it's still there, it's still present, it's just the final vowel. So let's look at the words that we see here. So for example, the first two. So we're familiar with the word jet, meaning body. And again, he puts the R there in parentheses. So saying that, there should be an R there, right? And then, of course, he corresponds this with Sango Tere, meaning body. And so notice that, I have in red in the ancient Egyptian, Middle Egyptian side, the T suffix in red, bolded in red. And then I have on the Songo side, the vowel, the final vowel bolded in red, but showing you that the vowels have a high tone in on each one. And so we represent the high tone. So we say low tone, high tone. So let's take this first word. In this this kind of short sound right here, we see that the first one is a low tone. So we say tere, and the last one has a high tone. So we have the line going down here towards the right, and then we have the for the low tone, and then for the high tone we have that little line going up. So that lets us know that this is a high tone. So when we say deret, meaning hand, in Shango, it is ti, hand. Again with the high tone. Peret, seed. Sango, le, seed. Because in this one, stress may have been on the second syllable. And, so the first syllable was dropped. And so it just left the le. But the T suffix is present in terms of the high tone. And notice that we kind of have the similar situation here in both Sango and in ancient Egyptian. So, kind of block this R out in your head. And so it's just J.T for body, but the full form is found in Sango as tere, body. But the word jerit, meaning hand, now it in Sango is missing the second syllable, but still keeps the suffix T in the form of the high tone. So it could be argued really that the R became I, because remember what we read in Hawks. It usually with the L sound or the R, the second in the coda position, right, which is this what you see here, it often disappears, but usually it goes through a process of a center transforming into a center glide sound. So that's your Y type sound. And depending upon the vowel, those two emerge and become E, like in this situation here, right? Now, but you see how, because this word T, hand, is the same word as tere, meaning body. But they both, over time, from the initial word meaning body, have splintered into two semantic sides. So remember that this word body also means side and also means border, because at some point it also referenced the arm. But now, it just simply references the hand. And we can see this throughout all the forms that we see here. And, all of these words have been verified in terms of the sound correspondences. The focus here is just words with the feminine T in Middle Egyptian and how they show up in a modern Shango language, right? And so there's several different things that are going on in this particular page right here. And so I have a few things highlighted. So notice that just like how we have the situation here with Deret, hand, and Shango Ti, Te, hand, right? It's kind of the same thing here at the bottom with Egyptian. So we had Jeret, because this is a nasalized velar trill, which is a type of R sound, and for bread, and Sango Te for food. And it should be noticed that also in ancient Egyptian, words for bread become the general word for food, as we discussed in the first video. So, so we can say here, if we wanted to put, that this sound, like if we wanted to put an R sound, because the nasalized volar trill in Sango also corresponds to the either or R or L sound in Sango. But in this case, again, this more than likely went through a centering glide stage, being between two vowels, and it more than likely transformed the first vowel, kind of merged with the second, and that's why we get the short in this form here, right? And so, that just wanted to put that out there. So like we can see by way of ancient Egyptian that this second form in the Sango is missing the consonant in the second consonant position. And just like how we have in Sango T meaning hand, we're missing a consonant in the second consonant position as evidenced by the Middle Egyptian. But in the word for Middle Egyptian, when we just say jet, it's missing the second consonant as evidenced by Shango, which preserves the second consonant in this word. Right? And again, historical comparative linguistics requires you to be very, very meticulous. There's certain things that you can only know by doing a full analysis. And so this is where this second or this first number 6 here, this highlight comes into play, because the word for body, this D with the underline here, this sound comes from G. And we'll get into that in a second. And so another proof besides the word jidit meaning hand is this form here, geret meaning leg, which is sango gere meaning leg. So notice that again, these words here, this gere, geret, jeret, body, tere, body, jeret, hand, the hand, all of these are the same word historically. They all derive from a word meaning body. So the semantic chain is body, then limbs of the body. So that's how you get arm, hand, leg, etc. So there had to be different prefixes and suffixes in the proto language that gave birth to these different sounding forms in the daughter languages, right? And there's a second issue that has to be confronted here. And again, when you're doing diachronic linguistics, semantics is an important field to study. And again, this notion of derivation is important, because this word here, which in Middle Egyptian is geret, meaning leg, in Sango is gere, leg. In the Sango language, that same word, just like in ancient Egyptian, the R corresponds and often interchanges with in. And so in Sango, we have this word gene, meaning visitor. And so notice there's a low tone on the final vowel here. So there's no corresponding feminine T in ancient Egyptian. But this word gere, meaning leg, is the same word as this word gene, meaning visitor, because of the semantic tree of the concept of leg, then walk, run, because the concept of walking and running is the action of the leg or foot. And so so from the to walk go comes this tertiary notion of to visit someone. And then of course at some point there was probably a what we call an agentive prefix or suffix. right? That noted the person of agent. That's how this word became visitor. So from the notion of body, then limbs of the body, leg, then leg to run to go, then which also means to visit, to go and come, to arrive, to visit, and then visitor. And so we can see the reflexes in the Egyptian language itself. So Egyptian maintain the notion of to go. So get to run away, to flee in terror. And then it has a different suffix. We have the word geru, meaning hunters, or it should be like in Bantu would be like mugeru, mugala, hunters, right? And so this Egyptian form gerer is a partial reduplication. So the first, it should be ger, meaning to run, to flee away in terror. And so in Sumerian, it comes in the form of meri and ngiri, right? And so because this particular G with this little rise and falling tone or mark at the top, this rise and fall right here, this symbolizes the ng sound, like when you say singing, ng. And so in the Sumerian language, ng and m correspond and interchange between the two major dialects. So this word via, meaning to pass, then by means of, and then under the authority of someone. And then it's foundational root, meaning foot. So leg and foot are the same thing. And then the concept of path, because the from the leg foot comes the walk run, and from walk run is the word for path, road, street. And it also becomes a word for river and water. But in this instance here is by means of, under the authority of someone. How does the word for foot mean under the authority of someone? You get a better sense of that when you, for example, look at King Tutankhamun's from the 19th dynasty. I mean, from the 18th dynasty, I believe. No, it's the 19th. No, it's the 18th. And you can see that these sandals here, there's a design of some Asiatics and some so-called Nubians, and representing certain nations and people who are under his feet. These are part of the 9 bowls, the enemies of the ancient Egyptians. Even though I only see 8 bowls here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So when you see this, you can see how the word for foot gave way to a derived meaning of under the authority of someone. So you're under the foot of someone. So we say in modern times, when somebody has their foot on their neck, right? They have authority over you. They control your movements. You're under the authority of someone. You're under their foot, right? And matter of fact, I'm going to tell you right now, the word for body, the word for hand, the word for leg, and the word for eye in ancient Egyptian, they all derive from the same word. And even this word belly. But that's another conversation for another day. But this is why it looks different in the language in this synchronic stage of Middle Egyptian. But historically, diachronically, they all derive from the same root. And so you can see how these different semantic trajectories over time, manifest themselves depending upon the presence and loss of certain prefixes and suffixes, become distinct words in the daughter languages. So this is why we have to be careful here, right? And so in this particular article, this is just one of many articles that discuss this particular sound change. So this is scratchy sounds getting smooth, the Egyptian velar fricatives and their palatalization. So it's a linguistic argument full of linguistic jargon, but we're not going to go through all that. I just wanted to show you on page 244 where this red arrow is pointing, showing that the D underline with the D with the underline on it, that's how we transliterate it, derives from a G sound. And there's many different ways that sounds. So it could come from a K with a dot under the ku, right? But it can also come from what we transliterate as lowercase x. And so it becomes the sh, and then from sh to j. So what this article is dealing with is a whole bunch of doublets in the language and how the process of fricatization and glottalization, etc., and the presence of palatal vowels caused, initiated a process of palatalization, and that's how we have these different forms of words in the language that are doublets, right? And so, but just to point out here that when I say that G becomes the D, so if you look here in the lower part of the screen on the left hand side, you can see that G becomes the J sound. And I also added that it becomes this, glottal fricative sound, which we say is a glottal fricative, but this is the IPA sign for it. But this became D. This also corresponds with D, and then this interchanges with Z. And so this tells us a lot because it's going to tell us that there's going to be some cognates with this sound that also corresponds to R, because the process of rotorization comes when a Z or an S sound is in between two vowels, and it goes through a process of what we call rotorization. And so, but that's another conversation for a different day. But just to show you this, so when we go back, and when I say that did it body and did it hand are, historically from a word, these are, later forms of a word which survives in the ancient Egyptian language as geret, meaning leg. The presence of the hand, the jeret hand and the geret leg with the R at the second consonant position, and these other forms that you see here in Egyptian prove that at one point in the language there was an R in the word jet, meaning body. So that's why he put that in parentheses to stress, diachronically speaking. He's not saying that you're going to find it in the records, just that it's by analysis of the compared forms and the internal analysis of the language. At one point, there was an R. So we're going to put the R there so you can understand better when we're comparing this to other words in the language. So there's no arbitrary. He just didn't randomly just wake up one day after drinking some green tea, decide that he's just going to stick an R there and or whatnot. So this is why we always have to read the text and understand the field and understand what exactly is being said here. And so, here's an example that I found that, you can see this happening. So we see that this form here, garet, and it has a secondary form in the language, a doublet, jeberet. Now, both of these are, derived forms. I would reconstruct this form as G B, nasalized velar trill R.T, because this B corresponds to W often, and B becomes W in between two vowels. So we know that this, by the presence of this second form in the language, this the original word was GB R.T, right? So again, because the word jet, body of a person, corresponds to these forms in the compared languages, and they have the second consonant here. And there's some other issues when he talks about isoglosses, and why, for example, when you see this form in Hausa, Jiki, Hausa is one of those languages where the K sound in the intermediate, in the intervocalic position still remains K. But in other languages, what was initially a K sound in the second consonant position, intermediate, that's intervocally, they palatalize, and so they can become chi, and then those can become R, as you see here, right? And I just wanted to show that, the semantics of why the word for body becomes the word for border. So in Middle Egyptian, you have Jeret, side of the human body. And then we have Jeret, hand. And so, and also in Middle Egyptian, we had this word remin, meaning side and half. And then we have a survival of the same word, meaning shoulder or arm. This is the foundation of the word. And even this form here, remin, is a word for body. And I discussed that in Umoja Volume 2. This N is a suffix. The word is rem. It's the same word where we get the word remech from, meaning human being, male, and then expanded form to human beings, the ch being a suffix. So we have this form here, gaber, meaning side of a room, gaber, meaning arm, because the concept of side derives from the word for arm, which comes from the word for limb, which comes from the word for body. So we're speaking historically here. We had this word in Middle Egyptian, gesu, meaning arm, geset, meaning run, course, gesti, meaning testicles, gesi, meaning to run, gis, limbs, ges, meaning side, because the word ges, meaning side, derives from the word ges, and gesu, meaning arm. But they all derive from ges, meaning limbs. And there had to be at one point in the language, which was lost, a word ges, meaning legs, because we have the form gesi, meaning to run, and gesit, meaning run course. So that's why in the Sango language, this form tere, meaning body and side and border, is important. That's how we know that these are the same word. That's why we can compare jeret, body of a person, to Coptic jer, border, because they're the same word. They're cognates. And out of the compared forms, it's only the Sango language that keeps all the semantic correspondences in the same word. So these are the kind of details that we miss when we're just looking for random arguments to go against somebody, and we don't know what we're doing or what we're talking about. And so, there's just certain principles and things that you just have to understand when you're doing historical comparative linguistics. And, so here's these last few slides is going to talk about these things here. So in G.J.K. Campbell Dunn's 2009 text, Sumerian Comparative Dictionary, and then there's a A second one is Sumerian comparative grammar. On page 2324, he states the following. And again, GJK Campbell Dunn is speaking diachronically, because again, he's dealing with the comparison and reconstruction of language families and the like, right? So he's saying ultimately, these primary words appear to be concrete nouns, mainly body parts, so says Stapleton, such as ka, hand. Body parts are eventually used to express actions. So verbs come from concrete nouns and primarily body parts. Body parts are eventually used to express actions. For example, arm equals action of the arm, to cut, to open. We can add to lift, to carry, to push, etc., to attack, war. The eye equals the action of the eye, to sleep, to see. Vision, imagination. This is how human vocabulary was built. The leg, the action of the leg. For example, to go, to walk, to run, to hunt, as we saw earlier. That can also go to attack and war from the word for leg. So Wenger understood the importance of this fact. Ultimately, there was no distinction between noun and verb. Both refer to things, objects of human experience. The same elements came to serve also as numerals, as demonstratives. So just like when we count to 5, you count on your fingers. So 1 finger, 2 finger, 3 finger, 4 finger, 5 finger. We call stealing the 5-finger discount, right? Demonstratives, this, that, there, his, pronouns, his, her, their, them, all come from body parts. Prepositions, adjectives. So as I discuss in the upcoming text, this adjective, meaning black, Kim, comes from the word for hair. There's a lot of things that you got to keep up with, conjunctions and so on. This affinity of different word classes was noticed by Sir Harry Johnston, who wrote a number of texts on Bantu languages. His book treats nouns as primary in most cases. The evolution of word classes was contingent on the development of grammar and complex words. Nouns, verbs, adjectives, etc., later differentiated through the addition of prefixed, suffixed, infixed elements. So that's how we get these various different forms that we see here. So we had a root that meant body, and then you add a particular suffix that let us know it's a member or a part of the body. And because you have these different prefixes and suffixes and infixes, they create an environment that initiates sound change. So this is how the word for get, which will probably have some different vowels than the word jeret, meaning body, how the word that still remain with the semantics of body changed over time in terms of its pronunciation. And then sometimes these prefixes and suffixes are then lost. So that's why, like what we see in the Songo language, the feminine, so-called feminine T suffix was, in this case, this T is a suffix for body parts. It disappears, but reappears in the form of high tone on the final vowel. But on the surface, if you're just glancing at it, it looks like there's no body part grammatical morpheme. But looks can be deceiving, which is why you have to be very critical and detailed and rigorous when you're making these analyses. So we can see in, for example, Sumerian that it lost the prefixes and suffixes. And so the root words then appear to be polysemitic. So here's a video of Professor Eugene Valberg, and he discusses the connection between African language and the mind. Now, I'm warning you now, if you go on YouTube and you find this video, this guy is very racist. And he's at a conference with other racist Europeans, and they are sitting here trying to justify the concept of race and to make to belittle African people and the like. So this is what's going on here. However, as we say in the United States, even a broken clock is right 2 times a day. Right? What he is about to say in this video is very true in terms of the first part. His second part of the analysis is what's false. But the first part is true, and it helps us to understand what is going on in these African languages and the like. So I'm just going to play it now.
My first inklings regarding African languages arose from a conversation with students in Nigeria about a coconut in a tree and how to say where it was. I said, how would you say that it's about halfway up the tree? And they simply said, you can't say that. All you can say is that it's up. I said, how about it's all the way up? He said, it doesn't matter. All you can say is up. In other words, there's no sense of gradations. A few years later in Nairobi, 2 women expressed surprise when they saw that I had an English dictionary. Isn't English your language? They said, yes, it's my only language. Well, then why do you need a dictionary? In short, they were puzzled that I needed an English dictionary, and I was puzzled at their puzzlement. I said, there are always times, I said, when you come across a word that you don't know, and so you look it up in a dictionary. They said, but if English is your language, how can there be words you don't know? I said, well, what do you mean? There's always, no one knows all the words in their language. And they responded, but we know all the words in our language. Every Kikuyu, which was their language, every Kikuyu does. I said, what? I was really surprised. And then it dawned on me that being an entirely oral language, which had never been written, they would have to know all the words in their language, because a non-written oral language only exists in the minds of the speakers of that language. Whereas in a language like English, which is written down, the language expands indefinitely and is much greater than one person could possibly know. So that if the words in Kikuyu weren't known by the speakers, they couldn't be anywhere else, because where else could they be besides in the minds of these speakers? Which means that a non-written language has basically a finite size and is basically static. But if the size of a language is limited, it follows that the concepts in that language are also going to be limited. And therefore that the language and the thinking of such people is going to be impoverished. Of course, it is impoverished only in relation or comparison to a language like English. English. African languages were of necessity.
So as you can see or hear from this speaker here, he observes two things. So when he was among the Gikuyu people in Eastern Africa, he someone asked him, why did he have a dictionary and for his language, and he was stunned that they would ask this kind of question because you know in English we have so many words, most of them are loan words in the English, but we have so many words that we have to have a dictionary to record all of the words in our language, right? And then the Kikuyu people are saying, well, we know all the words in our language. And he makes a good observation. And this is something that even Mboli speaks about in his 2010 book. And that is when you have a language that, especially that is not written down, it is the people are not going to try to waste a lot of energy and thought and brain resources on trying to memorize, hundreds of thousands of words. So how the language develops is that you have a small group of words, but you have a combining process that expands the usage of those words, because now these individual words that have concrete meanings can now serve a grammatical purpose, and now you expand the language in how you use it. Now, this particular professor, again, he gets into some more racist stuff, but he tries to say that the languages are limited, therefore the thinking of Africans are limited. And the reason, and this partially corresponds, at least in his mind, that the white man, especially the English white man, and has such a wide range of thought because we have so many words in our language, right? So he believes that the African languages are static and the European languages are not. And any linguist will tell you that this is BS. But again, a broken clock can be right, is right twice a day, right? And we're talking about the old school clocks, with the actual hands. If the hand stopped, the batteries ran out, um, the actual time will be right twice a day. And so this is one of those instances where, in his racism, on this particular point, he is correct, but his conclusion and analysis is incorrect, right? It's illogical. And so that becomes very important, especially when you're talking about the ancient Egyptian language. Because remember, ancient Egypt is the first the ancient Egyptians are the first people with writing in terms of a full system. Then come the Sumerians, and then everyone else who borrowed the script. And so, just like this individual here, Dr. Eugene from the previous slide, uh, Dr. James P. Allen, author of, a number of grammar texts and dictionaries dealing with ancient Egyptian. He also has a text called the Ancient Egyptian Pyramid Text. And on page 13, he makes the following statement. It just says Egyptian is rich. I just put the Egyptian and then language. The Egyptian language is rich in allegory and metaphor, but relatively poor in vocabulary. So they're not understanding the nature of African languages, that there's a small amount of basic roots, and then we expand the meanings and applications of those words by grammatical features. And then as time goes on and certain sound changes and the loss of morphemes and syllables and the like, and the borrowing of words, etc., these types of things expand. But if you don't know this aspect of African languages, especially of ancient Egyptian, you don't do a diachronic analysis, you make the kinds of mistakes that Capo-Chichi made when he's trying to make a difference between the word for Jeteru, side of a human body, and Jit, body, and then he can't even make the connection that the word for human body becomes the word for arm and side. And then from that juncture point, you get these other forms of the word that means side walls of a vehicle, for example, or side boards of a coffin. Like, he can't make the connection because he doesn't study African languages like that. He is a bona fide linguist, but he has concentrated on a narrow group, his own language and its surrounding languages, in a very synchronic time period, the modern time period. He has not done the work to go back and understand semantics and evolution of words over time, and how they create doublets and triplets in many different forms, and dialect variations and contact linguistics and dialectical linguistics. All of these different things come into play. And if you don't have that background, if you don't have that understanding, then trying to evaluate the merits of the conclusions of someone like a Jean-Claude Mboli, you're going to be confused. And then, especially if you're going to publicly make these critiques off of your confusion, you're now confusing other folks who don't have that background as well and just want to be on YouTube and be contrarian for no reason, which we find with certain people with YouTube channels. And so you always critique the critique. And so part of the critique is based upon the knowledge set of the individual doing the critique. And so this is why I do what I do, to better explain what exactly is going on, and how a lot of these critiques are baseless and or out of context. So again, the R that was added into the word jet, meaning body parts, was not arbitrary. He did it for a reason, to facilitate the comparative process based on work that he already did. And so he came to the conclusion that there was a second consonant that was, and it was a liquid consonant that was missing in this word. And we know so because of the other forms in the word. And so we expanded on Mboli's analysis and provided extra proof of that argument, which he did not, put in the book himself. So we verified and Mboli and falsified Capo-Chichi on this point. So with that said, I do appreciate each and every one of you for listening. And we have more of these coming up. So until next time, peace.